The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-3 was a Soviet interceptor and fighter aircraft used during World War II. It was a development of the MiG-1 by the OKO of Zavod No.1 to remedy problems that had been found during the MiG-1's development and operations. It replaced the MiG-1 on the production line at Factory No. 1 on the 20th of December 1940 and was built in large numbers during 1941 before Factory No. 1 was converted to build the Ilyushin Il-2. On the 22nd of June 1941, at the beginning of Operation Barbarossa, some 981 were in service with the VVS, the PVO and naval aviation. The MiG-3 was difficult to fly in peacetime and much more so in combat. It had been designed for high-altitude combat, but combat over the Eastern Front was generally at lower altitudes, where it was inferior to the German Messerschmitt Bf 109 as well as most modern Soviet fighters. It was also pressed into service as a fighter-bomber during the autumn of 1941, but it was equally unsuited for this. Over time, the survivors were concentrated in the PVO, where its disadvantages mattered less, the last being withdrawn from service before the end of the war. Development. The large number of defects noted during flight testing of the MiG-1 forced Mikoyan-Gurevich to make a number of modifications to the design. Testing was done on a full-size aircraft in the T1 wind tunnel belonging to the Central Aero and Hydrodynamics Institute to evaluate the problems and the proposed solutions. The first aircraft to see all of these changes applied was the fourth prototype of the I-200. It first flew on the 29th of October 1940 and was approved for production after passing its state acceptance trials. The first MiG-3 as the improved aircraft was named on the 9th of December, was completed on the 20th of December 1940, and another 20 were delivered by the end of the year. These changes included: the engine was moved forward 100 mm to improve longitudinal stability. A new water radiator was fitted. The first two modifications allowed an additional 250 liters fuel tank to be fitted underneath the pilot's seat. The outer wing panel dihedral was increased by 1 degree to increase lateral stability. An additional oil tank was mounted under the engine. Piping was fitted to use cooled inert exhaust gases in the fuel tanks to reduce the chance of fire. The back of the pilot's seat was armored with a 8 mm plate in later models. The supercharger intakes were streamlined. The main landing gear was strengthened and the size of the main wheels was increased to 650 by 200 mm. The canopy glazing was extended aft to improve the view to the rear, which allowed for the installation of a shelf behind the pilot for an RSI-1 radio. The instrument panel layout was improved and a PBP-1A gun sight replaced the original PBP-1. Ammunition for the Shkas guns was increased to 750 rounds per gun. 2 additional underwing hardpoints were added to carry up to 220 kilograms of bombs, spray containers or RS-82 rockets. State acceptance testing of 2 production aircraft was conducted between the 27th of January and the 26th of February 1941. They were found to be over 250 kilograms heavier than the MiG-1, which reduced maneuverability and field performance. Time to 5,000 meters decreased by over a minute, and the service ceiling proved to be 500 meters less. The MiG-3 was faster at sea level and at altitude, while the ranges reached by both aircraft were farther than that of the older aircraft. They were still less than the 1,000 kilometers required. Mikoyan-Gurevich protested against the range results, as the calculations showed that the MiG-3 could reach 1,010 kilometers based on a specific fuel. consumption of 0.46 kilograms per kilometer. During the state acceptance trials, the SFC was 0.48 kilograms per kilometer, but the operational trials conducted earlier showed a SFC of 0.38 kilograms per kilometer. They blamed the deficiency on a failure to use an altitude correction and that the engines had not been properly adjusted. They went as far as arranging for 2 more flights between Leningrad and Moscow to prove the MiG-3 could fly 1,000 kilometers. 2 production aircraft were flown to ranges of 1,100 kilometers and 971 kilometers, flying at 90% of maximum speed and at an altitude of 7,300 meters, contradicting the report of the NIIVVS. Despite the teething problems with the MiG-3, in 1941, one of the aircraft's designers, Mikoyan-Gurevich, was awarded the State Stalin Prize for his contribution to Soviet aviation. A number of reports had been received about poor quality aircraft received by the regiments, which pointed directly at the NIIVVS, as it was responsible for monitoring the quality of the aircraft delivered to the VVS. On the 31st of May 1941, the People's Commissariat of Defense decreed that the NIIVVS had been negligent. A number of senior managers were demoted and the head of the institute, Major General A.I. Filin, was summarily executed. A number of MiG-3s were found to have unacceptable performance at high altitudes despite being designed as a high-altitude interceptor. The oxygen supply was often insufficient and the stall and spin characteristics were very dangerous, especially to inexperienced pilots. This was demonstrated on the 10th of April 1941 when 3 pilots of the 31st Fighter Regiment of the Air Defences attempted to intercept a German high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft over Kaunas, Lithuania, flying at 9,000 meters. All 3 aircraft entered irrecoverable spins and the pilots were forced to bail out, one being killed. The NIIVVS sent an engineer to investigate and he found that the pilots had flown very few hours on the MiG-3 and that was the first high-altitude sortie. Other problems included insufficient fuel and oil pressure at altitude due to problems with the pumps. Comparison to other fighters, the MiG-3's top speed of 640 km per hour at 7,200 meters was faster than the 615 km per hour of the German Messerschmitt Bf 109 F2 in service at the beginning of 1941 and the British Supermarine Spitfire V 603 km per hour. At lower altitudes, the MiG's speed advantage disappeared as its maximum speed at sea level was only 505 km per hour while the Bf 109 F2 could do 515 km per hour. Unfortunately for the MiG-3 and its pilots, aerial combat over the Eastern Front generally took place at low and medium altitudes where it had no speed advantage. The MiG's loaded weight of 3,350 kilograms was greater than the Bf 109 F2's 2,728 kilograms and it was less maneuverable in the horizontal plane than the Bf 109. Due to its higher wing loading, this lack of maneuverability was exacerbated by the MiG-3's poor climb performance, its instability at high speeds, and its underpowered armament. The MiG-3's standard armament was one 12.7 mm UPS machine gun and two 7.62 mm SCAS machine guns, all mounted in the engine cowling and synchronized to fire through the propeller arc. In contrast, most versions of the German Messerschmitt Bf 109 that it encountered had one 20mm cannon and two 7.92mm machine guns. To remedy this problem, 821 aircraft were built with one 12.7mm UBK machine gun in a pod under each wing in mid-1941. This lowered its speed by about 20 km/h at all altitudes, which was unpopular with the pilots, some of whom removed the pods. 100 aircraft were equipped with a pair of OBS machine guns in lieu of the Schkass weapons. Another 215 aircraft also had just the OBS machine guns but were fitted to carry 6 RS-82 rockets. A total of 72 aircraft mounted a pair of 20mm Schwack cannon. A wide variety of armaments were experimented with by various units at the requests of the pilots to make up shortages. Production. The NKAP announced its 1941 production plan on the 9th of December 1940. Zavod No.1 would be required to build a total of 3,500 in 1941. Zavod No. 43, in Kiev would begin construction of the MiG-3 and complete 100 aircraft by the end of the year, and Zavod No. 21 in Gorky would start to plan construction of an upgraded version of the MiG-3, although this last program was cancelled shortly afterwards. 140 were delivered in January 1941, and Zavod No. 1 was on pace to exceed its quota, with 496 delivered in July, 562 in August and 450 in September. In October, the German advance on Moscow forced the factory and its OKO to evacuate to Ibyshev, where production resumed under unsuitable conditions. However, shortly afterwards, Stalin sent a telegram to the directors of the plants building the Ilyushin Il-2 and the MiG-3 demanding more Il-2 production, resulting in MiG-3 production being terminated in favor of the Il-2, with the final 30 aircraft built in 1942 from spares. An additional factor in cancellation of the MiG-3 was that its Mikoyan-Am-35A engine was closely related to the Il-2 Am-38, allowing production to be quickly switched from one to the other. MiG-3 production at Zavod No. 1 had already been planned to be reduced from a NKAP order of the 27th of August that required the factory to produce 420 fighters in September, declining to 100 in December, with Il-2 production ramping up to 250 in December, while the former aircraft repair plant at Kodynka Aerodrome was to be transferred to the NKAP, redesignated as Zavod No. 165, and begin production of MiG-3s. The German advance disrupted these plans for Zavod 165, and it never produced a single MiG-3. Operational history. MiG-3s were delivered to frontline fighter regiments beginning in the spring of 1941 and were a handful for pilots accustomed to the lower performance and docile Polikarpov I-152 and I-153 biplanes and the Polikarpov I-16 monoplane. It remained tricky and demanding to fly even after the extensive improvements made over the MiG-1. Many fighter regiments had not kept pace in training pilots to handle the MiG, and the rapid pace of deliveries resulted in many units having more MiGs than trained pilots during the German invasion. By the 1st of June 1941, 1,029 MiG-3s were on strength, but there were only 494 trained pilots. In contrast to the untrained pilots of the 31st Fighter Regiment, those of the 4th Fighter Regiment were able to claim 3 German high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft shot down before war broke out in June 1941. However, high-altitude combat of this sort was to prove to be uncommon on the Eastern Front, where most air-to-air engagements were at altitudes well below 5,000 meters. At these altitudes, the MiG-3 was outclassed by the Bf-109 in all respects, and even by other new Soviet fighters like the Yakovlev Yak-1. Furthermore, the shortage of ground attack aircraft in 1941 forced it into that role as well, for which it was totally unsuited. Pilot Alexander E. Shverev recalled the MiG was perfect at altitudes of 4,000 meters and above, but at lower altitudes it was, as they say, a cow. That was the first weakness. The second was its armament. Weapons failure dogged this aircraft. The third weakness was its gun sights, which were inaccurate. That's why we closed in as much as we could and fired point blank. On the 22nd of June 1941, most MiG-3s and MiG-1s were in the border military districts of the Soviet Union. The Leningrad military district had 164, 135 were in the Baltic military district, 233 in the Western Special Military District, 190 in the Kiev military district and 195 in the Odessa military district, for a total of 917 on hand, of which only 81 were non-operational. An additional 64 MiGs were assigned to naval aviation, 38 in the Air Force of the Baltic Fleet and 26 in the Air Force of the Black Sea Fleet. The 4th and 55th Fighter Regiments had most of the MiG-3s assigned to the Odessa military district, and their experiences on the first day of the war may be taken as typical. The 4th, an experienced unit, shot down a Romanian Bristol Blenheim reconnaissance bomber, confirmed by post-war research, and lost one aircraft which crashed into an obstacle on takeoff. The 55th was much less experienced with the MiG-3 and claimed 3 aircraft shot down, although recent research confirms only one German Henschel HS-126 was 40% damaged and suffered 3 pilots killed and 9 aircraft lost. The most unusual case was the pair of MiG-3s dispatched from the 55th on a reconnaissance mission to Ploiesti that failed to properly calculate the fuel consumption, and both were forced to land when they ran out of fuel. Most of the MiG-3s assigned to the interior military districts were transferred to the PVO, where the lack of performance at low altitudes was not so important. On the 10th of July, 299 were assigned to the PVO, the bulk of them belonging to the 6th PVO Corps at Moscow, while only 293 remained with the VVS, and 60 with the Naval Air Forces, a total of only 652 despite deliveries of several hundred aircraft. By the 1st of October, on the eve of the German offensive towards Moscow codenamed Operation Typhoon, only 257 were assigned to VVS units, 209 to the PVO, and 46 to the Navy, a total of only 512, a decrease of 140 fighters since the 10th of July, despite deliveries of over 1,000 aircraft in the intervening period. By the 5th of December, the start of the Soviet counter-offensive that drove the Germans back from the gates of Moscow, the Navy had 33 MiGs on hand, the VVS 210, and the PVO 309. This was a total of 552, an increase of only 40 aircraft from the 1st of October. Over the winter of 1941-42, the Soviets transferred all of the remaining MiG-3s to the Navy and PVO, so that on the 1st of May 1942 none were left on strength. With the VVS, by the 1st of May 1942, naval aviation had 37 MiGs on strength, while the PVO had 323 on hand on the 10th of May. By the 1st of June 1944, the Navy had transferred all its aircraft to the PVO, which reported only 17 on its own strength, and all of those were gone by the 1st of January 1945. Undoubtedly more remained in training units and the like, but none were assigned to combat units by then. Even with the MiG-3's limitations, Alexander Pokrishkin, the third leading Soviet and Allied ace of the war, with 53 official air victories, recorded a number of those victories while flying a MiG-3 at the beginning of the war. He later recalled, its designers rarely succeeded in matching both the fighter's flight characteristics with its firepower. The operational advantage of the MiG-3 seemed to be obscured by its certain defects. However, these advantages could undoubtedly be exploited by a pilot able to discover them. Variants. There were several attempts to re-engine the aircraft with the engine it was originally designed for, the Mikoyan-Am-37. This was designated the MiG-7, and one MiG-3 was converted to evaluate the engine in May 1941. It proved to have poor longitudinal stability, and the power plant itself still had a number of problems. The German invasion the following month caused the cancellation of the development of the AM-37 as Mikoyan's resources were required for the AM-35 and AM-38 engines already in production. To improve the low-level performance of the MiG-3, one aircraft was tested with the AM-38 engine used by the Il-2 in July 1941. It proved to be 14 km/h faster than a normal MiG-3 at sea level and was more maneuverable as well. It was recommended for production after passing its state acceptance trials in September, provided that a cure for the engine's tendency to overheat in ambient temperatures above 16 degrees Celsius was found. However, the sole prototype was shot down on the 5th of October during flight tests, and it was decided not to proceed with the idea as all AM-38 production was allocated to the Il-2. Ironically, later in the war, about 80 MiG-3s were re-engined with AM-38s to make them airworthy again. Many of these were rearmed with two 20mm Schwack cannon as well. On the 13th of May 1941, the NKAP ordered the OKO to convert a MiG-3 to use the Shvetsov-82A radial engine then entering production. The resulting aircraft had a variety of names, including I-210, MiG-3-82, Samolot-IKH or ISDA-U-65. The design was a failure, but was promising enough to continue the program as the I-211. A variety of other tests and other projects were conducted using MiG-3s. Leading-edge slats were evaluated in 1941, although they were not fitted on production aircraft, but were used by the I-210. A six-bladed propeller was fitted on one aircraft to increase thrust at high altitude to enable the fighter to catch the high-flying Junkers Ju-86P aircraft then overflying Moscow. A new propeller hub was made that mounted 6 standard VISH-61 blades, but nothing more is known of the project. 4 aircraft were converted to carry AFAI cameras for evaluation, and a 5th was then converted to evaluate all the improvements learned from the first 4. It was approved for use after trials at the NIIVVS. To improve the service ceiling, 2 aircraft were lightened down to a weight of 3,098 kilograms, but no further details are known other than one reached a height of 11,750 meters. There was also a proposal in 1941 to use the MiG-3 as part of a Zhvino combination with a Petlyakov FP-8 mothership. The 4-engined bomber would carry 2 MiG-3 SPB fighters, modified to carry a 250 kg Fab 250 bomb under each wing, close to the target, and would then release them to conduct the attack, after which they would fly back to the nearest friendly airbase. Some preliminary work was done before the Germans invaded, but it was abandoned afterwards due to the pressure of other work. The combination was estimated to have a maximum speed of 260 km/h and a range of 1,450 km. Survivors. The Russian company Avia Restoration has rebuilt 3 MiG-3s. They all use Allison V12 engines. One is in the US in the Military Aviation Museum of Pungo, VA, and another, rebuilt from a MiG-3 shot down in 1942, first flew again around the start of 2010. It will remain in Russia. Operators: Soviet Union VVS, PVO, Naval Aviation. Specifications: data from MiG, 50 years of secret aircraft design. General characteristics. Crew: 1. Length 8.25 meters. Wingspan 10.20 meters. Height 3.30 meters. Wing area 17.44 square meters. Airfoil Clark YH. Empty weight 2,699 kilograms. Loaded weight 3,355 kilograms. Power plant 1 times Mikoyan-Am35A liquid-cooled V12 993 kilowatts. Performance: maximum speed 640 km/h at 7,800 meters. Maximum speed at sea level 505 km/h. Combat range 820 km. Service ceiling 12,000 meters. Wing loading 155 kg per square meter. Power mass 0.30 kilowatts per kilogram. Climb to 8,000 meters 10.28 minutes. Armament: 1 times 12.7 mm UPS machine gun, 2 times 7.62 mm SCAS machine guns, 2 times 100 kg bombs, 2 spray containers for chemicals, gas or flammable liquids, or 6 times 82 mm RS-82 rockets.